Good evening. Welcome to Plot Character Voice. I'm Gary Snodgrass, and tonight I thought I'd talk a little bit about character development. I've gone over the 5 different plots. I wanted to start getting into characters. Um, Obviously, critical point of any story is who we, as people, need to identify with the characters in the story in such a way that it creates an emotion inside of us. And there are two things that make that possible. The relevance of the character to us, or the relevance of the situation they're in. When we find ourselves identifying with the character, we are feeling what they feel, hearing what they hear, seeing what they see. We are, that's what allows us to enjoy the story. And there are lots of different ways to make the character relevant, which we'll get into in a minute. But I can't stress this enough, the criticalness of the character connecting with the reader. Like I've said before, you can have the greatest plot in the world, but if nobody cares about the character, nobody cares about the story. We It's our identification with the character. And I'm not saying by identification, I'm not saying that we put ourselves in that position that the character's in, although sometimes we do, or that we see ourselves as the character. But we identify with the human part inside that character. We recognize him or her as one of us. We recognize ourselves as one of them. We can imagine being on a spaceship that has a leak and is in danger, even though we've never been in space and we've never been around anything that leaks. But we have been a human who has felt fear. We have been a human who has felt love. We have been a human that has felt wonder and mystery and all of the things that characters in books feel. So that's where the identification comes in, is at the emotional level. Not that I am capable of climbing a mountain, climbing Everest, or fighting off a alien horde. It's that I know what that person is feeling because I felt it too. And even more important, the character's feelings make me feel that. When the character is scared, I'm scared because I understand who they are. That's what I mean by identification. It's at the human level, it's at the emotional level, not at the theoretical, intellectual level. Example, Oliver Twist. He's a young boy, orphan in Victorian England. What would I know about that? Nothing, except that I was a young boy at one time. Alice in Wonderland. Alice. I've never been a young girl, but I've been in situations where it felt strange and unusual, and the world was out of kilter, and I was afraid, and I was curious, and all of those things can come together. So take that into account when you start developing your characters. just a real quick update, there is the protagonist and the antagonist. The protagonist is for and the antagonist is against. But don't forget that we're all protagonists in our own story. The greatest villain in the world, or the most evil villain in the world, is a hero in his own story. Okay? When we start developing our characters or thinking about our characters, we need to start thinking about how they fit into the plot. Excuse me. And there are some things that you don't want to do in the character development with certain plots. For instance, in a romance, and I've said this before, it's a female fantasy quite often. And so they are looking for the hero of the book. What they want to read about from the hero's perspective, not the heroine's perspective. Quite often it's curiosity, and it's also to identify with the heroine falling in love with this particular type of hero. And so think about that in the sense that very few young women dream about marrying somebody shorter than them, poorer than them, less socially connected than them, less brave than them, less liked by their friends than them. And so, since that's not what they want, don't create a hero like that. In mysteries, you can have the smartest detective in the world, a Sherlock Holmes, but you have to have things with that character that are identifiable and relatable. On a cozy mystery, you want it to be cozy. You want the hero to be liked. All right, that's part of the draw to the readers. Is here's a character that we like, that I wish I was my friend, who is involved in solving this ghastly crime. So you've got to have a likable character at some level. You can, on a police procedural type situation, it's different. You can have it to where the character is not as liked. There we like the person or identify with the person because of their competence. Okay, you see the difference? It's because they're so good. Sherlock Holmes is not a likable person. Not really. Monk, even Columbo, are not really likable people. So, but we identify with them because of their competence, their ability to achieve the results we want. And in some ways, their quirky nature makes it more interesting because we don't like them in a friendship type way. We are identifying with their brains, with their ability. A thriller, like I said before, you've got the Superman thriller, the James Bond, the Superman, the person who can do everything, and then you've got the everyman thriller. Great example is the Da Vinci Code. Here's just some guy, a lecturer, that ends up solving and saving society. So you've got the Superman and the everyman, and the nature of the plot will determine which character you use. If the plot requires expertise and ability beyond that of anybody normal, you lean towards the Superman. If the plot requires to solve the problem somebody who has a specialty knowledge or is just happens to be thrust into that situation, you can go with the everyman. So those two type of characters would be totally and completely different. Expertise, outlook on the world, um, connections, whatever. Um, those are two different types of characters. On a horror, let's say on a horror type plot, the objective is the person going to survive the night. Well, if you make that person a Superman, you take away all the conflict. Of course, Superman's going to survive. James Bond's never get killed. I like to think of it as a horror picture where the person being chased is a Navy SEAL with 20 years combat experience. I'm going to pretty much think he's going to do pretty good. Or it's an 18-year-old babysitter being pursued. Okay? So the nature of your victim or prospective victim determines which character you use. Coming of age, like I talked before, usually more on the male than the female side because females have their own coming of age experience thrust upon them by biology. But there are some things you can do that are required with the coming of age character. You make them vulnerable by making them young, if possible, or like in the Scrooge situation, making them an idiot and alone, so that you can have the arc and the change. But one of the things that really works is by making the character poor or low social status. You create a situation where they can grow and improve. It also creates conflict. A rich person, it's easier to get through the trials that they'll need to get through. So, things that can make a character relatable. Things that can make, let's say you want a character that you want to have the reader like. They're the main character of your book. They're you want the reader to identify with them. There could be times when you don't, but in this particular book, you want that. Things to think about is one of the things you can do is there's a great book out called Save the Cat. Early in the story, you have the main character save somebody. In this case, in the theory is you have him save a kitten. We automatically like him. We're on his side or her side, and want him to succeed, and we start identifying with him or her, and start to put ourselves in the same situation. We like to think we'd save a cat. Okay, so there's other things you can do to make the character more likable. Flaws. Nobody likes a perfect person. Okay, it's just the way we are. So you can give them flaws. A small scar, or you can give them large flaws. Think of Monk, or Sherlock Holmes and his opioid abuse, or whatever. You can give them flaws so that they're not perfect, and it makes them more real, and therefore more easy to identify with. Okay? Keep coming back to that. You can't have emotions about a character unless you care about and identify with that character. So, flaws are really good. Like I said, saving the character really early. Humor, very good. Snarky humor, if it's the right for that character to be snarky, can be very good. I might have told this story already once where I submitted a short story, and one of the critique partners said that it was too snarky because it lessened the conflict if the main character was funny all the time. And perfectly correct after I realized it. But humor can be very good. But it's got to be humor that matches the character. Okay? You can't have them being funny when there's no reason for them to be funny, or when that type of person wouldn't be funny in that situation. Um, I also personally think that being funny is very good. Be careful though that it's not a um, detrimental funny. If he's making fun of other people, at a certain point they become unlikable. Making fun of himself, making fun of authority, making fun of the situation, good. Making fun of other people, especially people lower on the social status, makes us not like that person. Um, so, saving the cat, uh, funny, physical characteristics. Like I said, for romance, making him taller. But don't forget the Superman and the normal man, the common man dynamic. Making them too attractive makes it harder to like them. Making them unattractive makes it harder to like them. I'll be honest with you. That's an emotional reality inside humans. Okay. Um, Wealth, education, um, tone, voice, all of these things can go to us liking them or not. Just think about it. You're meeting somebody for the first time at a party, and they have a snooty tone. We immediately think they are looking down on us. Are you going to like that person? No. Now then, if you want your main character to be that way, fine, but you're going to have to make up for it with other things to make us like him. And again, when I'm saying like, I'm talking about identifying and wanting him to succeed, and being able to feel the same emotions that person is feeling. Um, Wealth, education, social status, physical appearance, all go into building the character. Backstory, huge, huge impact upon our feelings towards the character. Um, People that have overcome a difficult backstory are more likable. It's the underdog. And if you think about it, that makes sense from a purely evolutionary perspective. All right? People that have overcome difficult situations in their backstory have proven the ability to survive. When it comes to selecting a mate, wouldn't you want somebody who's proven their ability to survive? It always comes down to that. People might argue with me, but everything eventually comes down to that, picking a mate. Um, because I'm talking at the evolutionary level, the biological level, the back of the brain level. We have structures inside of our brains that are instinctive of nature. And it is an instinct to admire somebody who has overcome difficult situations and survived. We do that without thinking about it, right? Um, so, a difficult backstory that they've overcome. Now then, you can have two characters, same backstories, but one turns out good and one turns out bad. In what we consider good as a general societal perspective. So it's how the person reacts to their backstory that is critical in the character development. How they overcame adversity in the past. Um, It also creates a feeling, a connection, because we ourselves have all gone through adversity. All right, some more than others, but it's the I know what he felt or she felt in that situation because I felt the same thing or close. Okay, and this is all before the story's even started. Um, I mean, this is why J.K. Rowling has Harry Potter living under the stairs. All right, dead mom, dad, terrible guardians, and his uncle and aunt, having him live under the stairs, alone. It's a backstory that makes us root for him, like him, want to help him succeed. We get to the Katniss in Hunger Games. Um, Dead father, poverty, worried about her little sister and her mom, feeling all this responsibility, her inability to be happy because everything is so bad. Okay, that's the backstory. It makes us care for her. Sometimes the backstory is the situation. You know, Romeo and Juliet, two young people, not a lot of backstory as individuals, but a huge backstory as far as families. Okay? Again, it makes us root for them because these two people are stuck in this terrible situation. So, flaws, physical appearance, social status, backstory, funny, saving a cat, Superman versus normal man, all critical aspects of character development. Now that's for the protagonist. We want the reader to care about the character. There are things you can do that can make a character not as likable. I'll give you a great example. Um, uh, Catcher in the Rye. Personally, I never really enjoyed the book because I couldn't identify with the character because he complained too much. Right? That was me. A lot of people identified with the character very much because he complained so much. Because they were at that age where they were feeling the same things he was feeling. Okay? Because I, at that particular time when I read it, wasn't feeling like that, the complaints came across as too much. Whereas if I had been feeling the same emotions already, or had some of the same experiences, the complaints would seem perfectly justified. So you got to take that into account when you're developing your character. What One of the things you can do, what some writers do, is what's called a story Bible, where they would just create a bunch of stuff about a character, stuff that might never get into the story, but stuff that identifies the character to the writer so that they know how they will react in a certain situation. Um, I don't, but people do. So those are protagonists. Keep them. You want to make them to where we like them. It doesn't have to be everything about them, but one or two things. That's what Saving the Cat is so good. You can have a curmudgeon-y old man that is really easy to not like, unattractive, not super intelligent, not super funny, but he saves a little kid at the beginning of the story. We immediately like him. Okay? Okay, he's got all these flaws, he's not perfect, but he's good about one thing. Um, we could have a character that is not likable and everything, but he's very good at what he does. And what he does is a benefit to society. We're willing to like him or give him the benefit of the doubt until he gets an opportunity to prove himself to us. But we don't forget, we want, this is all at the emotional level. We want to like the character, or if we want to root for the character, we want to identify with the character, to understand what they're going through, and see them overcome that is critical to us feeling the emotion. And don't forget, that's why we're doing this, okay? The why. Everything is about survival of the species. Everything is about overcoming danger. Everything is about overcoming adversity, conflict. That is why we are drawn to stories, to seeing characters that we care about overcoming conflict, which reinforces our ideas that we can overcome conflict, that we can survive, that this is a roadmap to survival, or this is a reaffirmation that survival is possible. This is that the instinctive back brain part of us, okay, which is where emotions come from. So, okay, that's your protagonist. Antagonists, the villains. Not all antagonists are villains. Antagonist just means they're against the main character. In a romance, they're both protagonists and antagonists, the female and the male leads. It could be an protagonist and antagonist. It could be two people racing for the same results. They're against each other, but they're not actually a villain. They're just on the other side. They're providing some of the conflict. So let's go with villains first. Your villain, first off, like I said earlier, needs to be understood. Okay? He or she needs to have a motivation for why they are being a villain. In their mind, they're the hero. You can make them as evil as you want, but if that evil is not understandable, then it's less likely for us to root against them. We just don't understand. It's a wash. It doesn't register. But if we understand why they are the way they are, it helps us identify with them. And therefore, we can root against them. In some cases, we can even root for them a little bit. But the villain is there. The main purpose of the villain there is to provide something for the main character to overcome. Of course, obviously not in the story, but that's from an emotional level. So the villain is critical. You need to make him or her as intelligent or as powerful. No, let me back that up. As powerful or even more powerful than the main character. More intelligent, more wealthy, more resourced, more connections, the government, whatever. So that the main character, our hero, can punch up. Okay? Again, I'll come back to, the Navy SEAL defeating the 16-year-old cheerleader just doesn't resonate with us. So we've got that aspect of things to take into account. The villain needs to have a capability, more so than our hero, a motivation to act the way he's acting. We don't have to see it on the page, but we have to know that it's there. and a chance to win. Okay, if you make a villain to where it's obvious he's going to lose, it takes away all the conflict. Again, physical aspects need to be taken into account depending on what you want to achieve. Um, uh, that's the villain. Another antagonist is the other side of a pair. Buddy cop movies. Okay, you can think of any two cops trying to fight, and it's the same arc as a romance, but one's an antagonist, one's a protagonist, and they're battling with each other throughout the story. And in addition, there's quite often the main criminal, which is another antagonist. That's an antagonist to the pair, and within the pair, there's a protagonist and an antagonist, for and against. Um, so those are your main characters. Then you're going to have side characters. And side characters can be anything you want, but they need to be appropriate. Um, they need to fit into the story and the plot, either to enhance the hero's capability, to illustrate the differences between the hero and everybody else, to humanize the hero, whatever. They're great for comic relief. They are, I think, actually a critical point of of stories because they show by their reactions and their tone and everything else different perspectives of the situation. They you got a Regency romance and you got a butler. Now, obviously, the butler is not the main character, but by how he reacts to the Duke can dictate how we view the Duke. Okay? You like the butler and the butler likes the Duke. Okay, the Duke must be a pretty good guy. Or the butler gives the Duke a hard time, keeping him in place. We like the Duke because life's not too easy for him. Okay, little things like that. And again, you get into appearance and physical stature and social status and all those. As and it's not so much that we identify with the side characters, and we can identify with them very much. I mean, it can be that's me and I'm it, and he's me, and or I have no idea what that role is, but I know what that person feeling in that situation. So we can identify and should identify with side characters, but not as intently as we do with the main characters. Okay? So you show more emotions with the main characters. You put them in more dangerous situations. You all of those type of things. I remember watching The Lone Ranger. The old TV show years ago when I was a kid, and I was fascinated by Tonto, the Native American sidekick, and I always thought he had some of the better story function. But the story focused on the Lone Ranger. The main question was the Lone Ranger going to survive and save the community? And you do it with Tonto's help, but it's the amount of screen time, the nature of the plot conflict revolved around the main character. But Tonto's perspective was critical. It also was a great opportunity for the main character to express thoughts and ideas via dialogue. He had somebody to talk to. Now, that's what Watson is for in Sherlock Holmes. And also because we like Watson and Watson likes Sherlock Holmes gives us an in to liking Sherlock Holmes. And we come back to why, or why is it important? it, we want to get pulled into that rabbit hole inside the story. And making the side characters realistic is critical to that. I mean, if you've done everything else and then you put in a bad side character, it throws us out. Okay? It makes us question everything we thought we knew. And when I say bad side character, I mean an undeveloped side character that is of importance at that point. All right? And there are tons and tons of ways to get into how to show who a character is, and I'll get into those in the next video. But I'm talking about relative identifying with the characters, the main character or characters, the villain, and the side characters. It is important. You don't want to overdo the side characters, but you need to have enough there to identify with, as for the reader to identify with. Okay? And why is it important? And I'll go right back. Why is it important that we identify with a character? Because we cannot feel emotions unless it is something we understand and can share with the character in the story. We've been there. We've had that emotion before, and we understand that this person that I care about is having the same emotion. When you're reading and a character that you care about is very afraid, you're going to become afraid. When a character you don't care about is afraid, you're not going to be afraid. Simple as that. When a character you care about falls in love, you're going to fall in love. When a character you don't care about falls in love, you're not. Okay? That's what it comes down to. And that's why we do what we do. And it's because of that instinctive part of our brain, that emotional part of our brain, can only emote for people we care about, identify with. Because it can even be a villain that we don't care about, but we can identify with them. We understand them because we have felt what they are feeling. Okay? That's the first part of characters, and I'll probably do a little bit more on characters as I go along. I've got to think some things through. Have a nice night. Thank you very much.